Hello there. What I'm going to do in this video is introduce you to two controls that you can use as drop-down controls within the cells of WinGrid. So I pretty much went through some quick setup just by dragging and dropping stuff from my data sources window. I have a grid that represents individual order items, and then I have a child grid that represents the order details for each selected item. So if I were to just run this just to show you what it looks like, it loads up and I select an order, we got its order details. Select another order, got its other order details. However, for those scenarios where you have a foreign key field or a property that's a foreign key that hooks up to a lookup table of some kind in another related entity within the same database, it may not make sense to show your end user this meaningless key item because they won't be able to just type stuff out with them knowing it from the top of their head. Best practice for this is to show them the actual user-friendly identifiable values that exist in the lookup table, pretty much like all the scenarios that you'll see in this case. So we have two controls that we can use to make this happen. So let's take a look at how we can do this. So I have a little bit of space down below on this user interface because the first thing I want to show you is the ultra drop-down control. So if you've seen in other videos the ultra combo and the ultra combo editor, you can use those two controls as well, but if you want a multi-column drop-down combo box control inside of WinGrid, then I would highly suggest you use ultra drop-down. It's a multi-column drop-down just like ultra combo, but it's optimized for high performance use case scenarios within WinGrid. You can't use the ultra drop-down outside of WinGrid. If, see, as I throw it here, kind of looks like WinGrid, right? You might even think, oh wait, did I just drop a WinGrid here? But it's not, it's an ultra drop-down. So if I click on this guy and hook up a data source to it, locate the data source property, and I want to hook it up to the products binding source that I already have here. And we want to choose a value member, so which property of the underlying data model represents the primary key that uniquely identifies a selected item, and then we want a user-friendly display string, so the one that makes sense from the underlying data model's properties here is the product name property. And then we could do other cool things like, so if I click on the start, and I could configure this just like I did in a previous video, so column arrangement overview, and let's say if I use row layouts and I just get rid of everything. I usually start off by double clicking everything really fast, so I'll grab just product ID, product name, supplier ID, and say unit price. Let's put product name here. Move these guys around, just do something simple without going crazy, and we'll click OK, apply, and OK, and that's good. That's good enough. Now, again, you could always do this at runtime, or you can do it at design time. Since I'm bound to my data model at design time, I do it through Designer, but you could do it through code. If you double click the grid, you'll get the initialize layout event that fires, and then you would do the same thing to the grid or to the initialize layout event of the combo, and you want to access e.layout.bands, and then let's say bands sub0.columns, and then you could set stuff up like this. So that's how you could do all this work. So now ultra drop down, let's go back to the designer. So if you see this through the properties window within Visual Studio, then you could do it the same way through code and code behind. So now the next part of the story here is hooking this control up within the product ID column of this WinGrid right here. So this is how we do it. Let's click on Start menu here, the Start button. Let's click on Band 0, the one and only band in the grid. Click on Columns, and then we'll find the Product ID column. And now, here's what you can do. If you use this technique, you can't go wrong. So you want to look for Editor Component property first, and if you click on the drop down, this one is empty. So now what happens is you have two properties that allow you to hook up various controls and components within WinGrid columns. Editor component is what's used for any of the Infragistics editors that implement the iProvides embeddable editor interface. So a lot of our controls implement that are used for editing. So you could have a really rich editing experience in WinGrid. However, the Ultra dropdown does not implement that. It's optimized for, it's a slightly different optimization for a dropdown component. So you want to go to the value list property, and it's located there. That's where you want to go. So that's where you go to hook up your value list. So the value list engine or the value list mechanism is different than how you've learned about iProvide's embeddable editor, so slightly different. But that's why it shows up in the value list property and not the editor component property. So click on this, and you hooked it up, and you're good to go. And now when we run the application, and notice how product ID immediately has a user-friendly string, which is actually the display name property of the product. So if I click on this, I have my cool multi-column drop-down with nice selectable view here, where I have my row layout that makes it easier for me to understand my data values. So I could just click away and select items. So that's one way of getting a really cool drop down into the grid. And I really went a little bit overboard with the row layouts and all this stuff. You can just have a really long multi-column layout, just like flat across the top if you like. So now what I'm going to do is, let's undo this work that I've done so far. So I'll go back here and go back to that column and remove that properties value. So right click and reset it, and now it's not hooked up again. Notice how at runtime the Ultra dropdown is not visible because it's not really meant to be visible on your form. So the other thing that I wanted to show you is working with the Ultra combo. So let's dump, the Ultra combo editor. Let's dump that on the form, and let's click on this smart tag and hook up a data source to the product's binding adapter, or binding source rather. And what I want to do is click on the Ultra combo editor. Let's blow away the text, and what we're going to do is set the value member to product ID and the display member to product name. Product name right there, so that way we know what we're looking for. And we'll go back to the same grid and click start. Go back to the column, go back to product ID column. Let's start from the top again. Do I go and find the editor component? Is it there? Yes, it is. But now if I go to the value list property, it is actually, the other one is there. Ultra dropdown 1 is there, but the other one, the combo, is not. So the editor component is the one you want to use for this. So Ultra combo editor 1. Why? Again, because it shows up in this property because Ultra combo editor implements the iProvide's embeddable editor. The Ultra dropdown does not. So let's click on this guy right here and apply and OK. And now let's take it for a test spin and see what we get. Same thing, we get really easy to see user-friendly display string, but look how we actually see the editor down here. So Ultra combo editor is visible on the form. You want to set its visible property to false and get it out of the way and just push it behind something. Just know that it's there. But now when I click on the drop down, notice that it's a simple drop down list. Simple, lightweight, very easy to navigate. But again, it's very simple, so you don't get the rich functionality of a multi-column drop down with row layouts and all the other fancy stuff that is capable. So the choice is up to you, whatever you feel that is more appropriate for your application. So now you've learned 2 ways of getting drop downs into the WinGrid control. So make sure you identify your use cases, your end users, and then take the most appropriate action and choose the right control.
Infragistics. On the web at infragistics.com.